Hey guys, and I am bringing you with my next review of an elderly video game system. I would like to explain the Nintendo Game Boy. Now, the Nintendo Game Boy was released in 1989 along with the Atari Lynx, which I reviewed in another video. Now, the Game Boy actually was the second handheld system made through Nintendo. The first handheld systems made through Nintendo were the Game & Watch series. The Game Boy, it was an 8-bit system that had no color, but it required less batteries than the Atari Lynx. It came with a bundle, which means that it came with a certain accessory or a certain game when you buy it, and it was Tetris. The Game Boy Color and the Game Boy alone worldwide sold 118.69 million units. Yes, it was extremely popular. The Game Boy also helped continue series from the NES, which then Nintendo later came out with the SNES, which continued the series even more. Nintendo main enemy during this time was Sega, when they came out with a handheld called the Sega Game Gear. It was almost the same as the Game Boy, except it had color to it. So, like I've said in an earlier video about the Atari Lynx versus the Game Boy, it's almost the same exact thing, except Sega was a lot more popular than Atari and Epyx. So, once again, you kind of just had to take your pick. So, it was basically a three-way battle. Game Boy versus Sega Game Gear versus Atari Lynx. Atari Lynx destroyed within the first round. It was a very long battle between the Game Boy and the Sega Game Gear. Now, just an interesting fact, 46% of Game Boy users and buyers were actually female, only leaving about 54% male. So it was pretty evened out with which gender wanted to play that game system. Sega tried to taunt Nintendo by saying that Sega's system was better because it had color and all these other features, but Nintendo was able to pull through because they were a lot more popular than Sega during that time, and they were able to get more sales. 20 years after the Game Boy was made, remembered the Nintendo Game Boy and decided to put it in the National Toy Hall of Fame, which is really cool for Nintendo, showing that how popular they're getting nowadays. Yeah! I'm going to explain to you now the different types of Game Boys. They first came out with the original Game Boy, and then there was a Game Boy Color, which, as it states in the name, it added color to the game system. Then there was the Game Boy Advance. The first Game Boy Advance was the Game Boy Advance SP. But there was one Game Boy called the Game Boy Micro. Didn't sell very well, but it was like this big probably. Wasn't very big at all, but it was only able to play Game Boy Advance games. And there were two more. Game Boy Pocket, which came right after the original Game Boy, and the Game Boy Light, which came after the Pocket. Kind of like how today there was the DS and then there was the DS Lite, that kind of deal. And now I'm going to list some of the games that I don't have for the Game Boy that I think would be pretty interesting to try sometime. They have an Alien 3 game for the Game Boy. They have an Alien vs. Predator, The Last of His Clan game, which is interesting because the Atari Lynx, they had a game that was Alien vs. Predator, but it wasn't that title. Battletoads was one for the Game Boy. Beetlejuice, which is a movie, really creepy movie, but yeah, they made a game for that. Dr. Mario, very good classic. It was similar to Tetris. They made a Jurassic Park game. And Pokemon Red and Blue were also for the Game Boy. And an interesting thing is that there was a Pokemon Green, but it was only released in Japan. And now I would like to show some gameplay before I rate the Nintendo Game Boy. As you guys may see, I am pointing my camera at a computer screen. Some of you may be asking, why are you pointing a camera at a computer screen? Well, I found out that trying to video record something through the Game Boy with a video camera wasn't the best way to do things. So I decided to get an emulator from a website called coolrom.com. Thank you guys. And this is how I'm able to access the game called Pokemon Trading Card. Now, before Pokemon Blue and Red, they came out with Pokemon Trading Card, which was actually a video game style of the collection of Pokemon card games. This is the opening part where you have to select your name, and as you all very well know, it shall be Tom. And there's you, and it says that you are crazy about Pokemon cards. And one day you hear a rumor that the legendary Pokemon cards are extremely rare and powerful cards held by Pokemon trading card games' greatest players. The Grandmasters are searching for one to inherit the legend. Dreaming of inheriting the legendary Pokemon cards, Tom visits the card researcher, Dr. Mason. Now, a cool interesting fact that you may not know about Pokemon games is that all the professors, except maybe for this game, I'm not sure, but they're professors, they're all named after plants, which is pretty cool. It's just talking about how he's going to teach you how to play the card game. But it here just asks you about what kind of cards you're able to use. I already know how to play, so no thanks. So anyway, here's the battling session. I don't know what that was. Okay. Yeah, he explains that you draw 7 cards. It's basically the simple rules if you've ever played a Pokemon trading card battle. So it just shows you the Pokemon that you have in your deck. So he basically tells you what you need to do. You can take a quick look at your deck, but he tells you to send out your Goldeen. So that means the Goldeen was placed in the arena, and you're able to have this thing called a bench, which is where you basically have Pokemon waiting to go into battle. Let's see. So it tells you to choose Staryu and put him in the bench. So then it automatically passes out the character's prizes. A coin will be tossed to see who goes first, and it's already preset to make you go first every time for this battle. You draw 1 card and you have to make a move. I think this is all the gameplay I'm going to show for now, because unfortunately my emulator isn't necessarily the best or correct kind for the actual game system I'm reviewing. Thank you guys for watching my video. If you like my videos, please subscribe and leave any of the comments in the comments. And I will see you later. Thanks for watching this video, even though it may not be my best. Bye.